Hello and good morning everyone. So for today our group, which is group 2, will be presenting our lab 6, which is spinal reflexes and reactions in human.
This experiment consists of three objectives. First, to study humans' reflex responses in swallowing action. Second, to study human reflex responses when receive stimulus on sight and touch from the external environment. And lastly, to study human reaction time to sight and touch and the speed at which impulses are transmitted in the nervous system.
For experiment 6.1, the first procedure is to swallow the saliva in your mouth cavity and immediately afterwards try to swallow it again. You will find it difficult to swallow for the second time. While for the second procedure, drink a glass of water and repeat procedure 1. Note that you have no difficulty swallowing it rapid succession. For result and observation of experiment 6.1, for swallowing saliva rapidly without water, saliva was hard to be swallowed after the first time, while swallowing saliva rapidly with water, saliva can be swallowed easily after the first time, second time, and also the third time. Question 6.1. Why is it difficult to swallow our saliva in rapid succession? Is swallowing a completely voluntary action? The saliva was easy to swallow at first, but swallowing twice at once become difficult. This is because saliva serves as a stimulant in the oral cavity. After the saliva has been ingested for the first time, there is no more saliva and hence no more stimulus. As a result, we must wait for our salivary gland to create enough saliva to act as a trigger before we can initiate the swallowing reflex. While for question 2, explain the ability to swallow in rapid succession when drinking water compared to just swallowing saliva in your mouth cavity. Swallowing is not entirely voluntary because it has to allow for peristalsis to happen. For a period of time, the esophageal muscle must relax. It is also known as voluntary reflex, and it happens in conjunction with involuntary reflex. For discussion 6.1, based on the experiment, it is difficult to swallow the saliva in the mouth cavity. According to the result of the experiment, swallowing saliva in the mouth cavity for the second time is difficult because saliva functions as a stimulus in the mouth cavity. There is no more saliva after the saliva is swallowed for the first time, hence there are no more sensations. As a result, we must wait for the swallowing reflex to occur while we make additional saliva. However, drinking water makes swallowing easier because the water works as a stimulus, replacing saliva in our mouth cavity and stimulating the esophageal muscle to swallow. To ensure that the swallowing experiment goes well, the precaution step is to swallow the saliva promptly after swallowing and to avoid drinking before the experiment.
Experiment 6.2. Procedure. Both experimenter and subject should have a stopwatch each and will start both stopwatches simultaneously. Experimenter stops her stopwatch. As soon as the subject sees this, the subject then stops her stopwatch too. Measure time lapse between both the experimenter and subject action, which will give the reaction time of the subject and record in table 6.1. Repeat 10 times and calculate the average reaction time. Here are the results for the experiment 6.2. Question 2. Is there any evidence that the subject improves with practice? Yes, the time lapse between the experimenter's times and the subject's time is decreasing in the table, indicating that the subject is improving with the practice. Question 6.2. Reaction times can be used to determine how long it takes for the body to react to external stimuli. The brain must first detect and recognize the signal, and then choose an appropriate response, and then plan how to carry out the response. Our eyes must notice the stimulus and perform the response in order to stop the timer, according to experiment. Because it takes time for a signal to get from the eye receptor to the brain and then from the brain to the effector, there will be a gap between the experimenter and the subject. When doing this experiment, it's recommended that both the experimenter and the subject start the stopwatch at the same time to avoid the subject's stop time being significantly longer than the experimenter's.
From experiment 6.3, here are the results which shown in table 6.2, time lapse between experimenter and subject sections, and in table 6.3, the analysis of reaction time results. Next, we move on to question 6.3. First question, is the subject's reaction time longer in the experiment 6.3, reaction to touch, compared to experiment 6.2, reaction to sight? If so, why? The answer is no. Reaction to touch is faster than sight. This is because the haptic feedback can be processed without the presence of any higher order cognitive processing. Second question, which of the reflexes that you have investigated are spinal reflexes and which are cerebral? Explain your answer. The answer is, the reflexes that we have investigated are spinal reflexes. This reflex contributes to normal muscle tone and mediate a number of simple motor responses. This coordinates semi-autonomic actions such as when detect tactile and are recruited and modulated by descending projections from the brain. The third question, what other reflexes are shown by humans? What parts of the CNS, spinal or cerebral, are involved in each case? The answer is, other reflexes that are shown by humans are hearing ability and sense of taste. The parts of the CNS that are involved is cerebral.
Next, discussion of experiment 6.3. Based on the experiment 6.3, the effector, which is the finger used to push the timer, will receive the response signal. Because the procedure must be a reaction, there must be a time difference between the experimenter's time and the subject times for the stopwatch to be stopped. When doing the experiment, the subject must close her eyes before noticing the experimenter touch her foot in order for the reflex reaction to operate properly. The experimenter should not count so that the subject can stop the timer whenever she felt touched by experimenter. Other than that, the experimenter and the subject should start the timer at the same time before doing this experiment. In this experiment, precaution steps that should be taken are we repeat this experiment 2 times to get the accurate reading. Besides that, we also make sure that we use the same body part, which is the experimenter feet, touch the subject's feet. It is because each body parts have their own sense of pace and reflex.
Okay, so we have reached to the conclusion. Based on the experiment, we can conclude that we managed to achieve the objective of the experiment, which is to understand reflexes in our body. We had determined that after drinking water, it is easier for us to swallow our saliva in rapid succession because swallowing reflex involves both voluntary and involuntary actions. We also managed to measure and calculate the reaction time of the subject to sight and to touch, where the reaction time to touch is faster than to sight. Through these experiments, we learned that reflex actions are involuntary. Reflex arcs that contain only two neurons, a sensory and a motor neuron, are considered monosynaptic. Overall, the time react to stimulus is short due to the efficiency of nervous system in human body.